The Ant-Man film has been in the works since Edgar Wright came on board a bit under a decade ago, before it was put into a holding pattern for a number of years to allow other Marvel properties to stretch their legs. Some of the results being another attempt at a Hulk film, 3 Iron Man features, and the appearance of a man with a bow and arrow in a sleeveless leather vest. The point is, we are finally getting the long-awaited Ant-Man film in 2015. So let's talk about Ant-Man, his history, his powers, who'll be playing him or them, and probably some other stuff, starting with, who is Ant-Man? Ant-Man is what's referred to as a legacy hero, a character who's had a number of people, possibly a family member or a descendant or someone else entirely, who's taken up the mantle. The Phantom, the Flash, Green Lantern, Robin, Captain America, these are all examples of the thing I just said. There also exists a number of legacy villains. That's hardly relevant though, it's weird that you brought it up. A variety of people have taken on the Ant-Man role across different time periods and alternative realities, some adopting his powers if not his name, but really there are 3 main characters who refer to themselves as Ant-Man from the Marvel Universe. The first of which being Henry Pym or Hank Pym. He developed size-altering technology through his discovery of Pym particles, as well as constructing a helmet that can communicate with insects, but more on those things in a bit. Throughout the years, he's changed his superhero identity a number of times, adopting the names Giant Man, Goliath, Yellow Jacket, and the Wasp. Speaking of which, he's had a number of relationships over the years. The main one being with his wife, Janet Van Dyne, who he shared the Ant-Man technology with and whom assumed the identity of the Wasp. He also hit her once, but the less probably said about that, the better. A long while down the road, a man named Scott Lang, an ex-con who did time for burglary, stole the Ant-Man technology to save his sick daughter. Hank Pym was then like, I like your moxie, kid, allowing him to keep the technology as long as he used it for good. From there, Scott Lang's done a bunch of pretty helpful stuff, including assisting Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, the Hulk, and the Avengers, and like pretty much any comic book character ever, he's been dead, only to be revived later. Which is like inevitable in any comic book. It's like if someone coughs blood into a handkerchief in a movie, dead. You're so dead. The most recent and controversial Ant-Man is that of Eric O'Grady, a man given a run under the story arc Irredeemable Ant-Man. He starts off as a low-level SHIELD agent and total bastard who happens across some Ant-Man armor, only to continue being a total bastard, using it mostly, well, initially at least, for his own nefarious purposes. A lot of which is just to look at boobs and stuff. Specifically Miss Marvel's. He's not, however, all bad, and deep down, he does have a good heart. Also, I think he's dead at the moment. Probably forever, not really. Powers and abilities. The powers of those who have taken up the Ant-Man tool across the board are pretty consistent, mainly stemming from Hank Pym's discovery of Pym particles, a lucky coincidence being they're called the same thing as the person that found them. Pym particles have the ability to alter the size of objects and living things. Initially, he used them in liquid form, meaning anything they came in contact with was able to shrink. Later, Pym managed to synthesize them as a kind of gas inhaler, one use being a fantastic prank to pull on anybody asthmatic. And then finally, he developed it in pill form. After a person's long-term exposure to them, Pym particles begin to be produced naturally in the body, allowing a person to change size at will. However, the strain put on one's body can result in a complete mental breakdown, causing what can only be described as Hank Pym hitting his wife. Also, interesting fact, Pym particles don't compress the matter of a person, but extend that same matter into another dimension, allowing it to be claimed later. Now, I don't know anything about particle physics, or for that matter, interdimensional mass storage, but that's some solid science. As for how small he can get, well, that whole thing is, kind of vague. His seemingly fallback size is the size of an insect, or an ant, I guess. My podcast co-host Mason tells me that he can't quite get to a microscopic level, unlike the Atom, the DC character with similar-ish abilities. What's great about Ant-Man is, though, he retains the strength from when he's a regular-sized man. So he could totally punch someone's tooth right out! His size manipulation also makes him perfect for stealth missions and escape when he needs to. Now, not everybody knows this, maybe you do, probably, I don't know, but Pym particles also give him the ability to increase his mass, meaning he's capable of becoming about 100 feet tall max, and with this increased size comes increased strength. His strength, though, doesn't compare to, say, that of the Hulk or Thor, but he is capable of lifting around 100 ton at his peak ability, which is more than your dad. Of course, being this big makes him slower and more susceptible to things like pressure point attacks, as these vulnerable spots are much larger. Ant-Man also possesses a helmet which allows him to communicate with insects, not commanding them so much, but asking them to help him out, sometimes maybe using them to disable a computer or blind his enemies. The helmet also comes equipped with a voice amplifier, so those around him can still hear him if need be. Different Ant-Man also have different equipment depending on the era. Things like ropes or robotic arms, jetpacks, and a bunch of other stuff I'm not going to get into, because looking up variations of comic book characters on the internet is a dark and consuming hole from which I'll probably never return. Depending on which Ant-Man we're talking about, his physical abilities vary. All of them maintain a good level of fitness for men their age and have degrees of hand-to-hand combat training. For example, Hank Pym is great at judo. He probably has all the belts if getting belts in judo is a thing. Intellectually though, there's much more variation. Hank Pym is clearly the most intelligent, with him discovering the use of Pym particles, though Reed Richards once claimed to know more about them than he did. He's also an expert in artificial intelligence, which led to the creation of Ultron, which is bad, but Ultron created Vision, which is good. Scott Lang, on the other hand, is an expert in electronics. A lot of those skills he acquired when in prison, whilst Eric O'Grady appears to have an average level of intelligence. Not even being quite capable of mastering talking to insects, but he does have a lot of additional technology, which he mostly uses to be a total prick, which I may have mentioned. Villains! As for villains, Ant-Man has his fair share, but other than his own creation, Ultron, who's a fantastic adversary, none of which are that noteworthy. Now, I'm sure there are some of you who disagree, and that's fair enough, but his rogues gallery isn't a patch on the likes of Batman or Spider-Man. Sure, there's ones like the Eric O'Grady life model decoy, who's pretty interesting, and Egghead, but Batman even has an Egghead, pictured here holding an egg, clearly edging out the Marvel version on the use and love of egg-related criminal shenanigans. I could go through all the villains listed in the Marvel database, but they're all there if you do want to read up on them. In a nutshell though, he's gone up against a number of popular Marvel villains and organizations like AIM and Hydra, plus he sided with Tony Stark during the Superhero Registration Act. His main contribution though ended up being having a hand in the creation of a cybernetic clone of Thor who killed Goliath, causing a number of pro-registration heroes such as Sue Storm and Spider-Man to switch sides. Great job, Pym! Ant-Man 2015! At this point, there are a few things we know for certain about the 2015 Ant-Man movie. Paul Rudd will indeed be playing the title character, though that being of Scott Lang. The original Ant-Man, Hank Pym, will be played by Michael Douglas. The movie will be set in the present-day Marvel Cinematic Universe, but will most likely have a prologue, as explained by Edgar Wright in 2006, where the Hank Pym Ant-Man will be in action in the 60s. This clearly indicates that between Captain America, the very first Avenger, and Iron Man, the first MCU movie character, there were a lot of things going on with a number of superheroes and villains, such as that of the Winter Soldier, who was operating in that time that is yet to be fully explored. The movie will show how Scott Lang acquires the suit, resulting in a sort of team-up between the two Ant-Men. It's also indicated that Lang will be a burglar like in the comics, who'll obviously then come good. As for the villain, well, Wright has emphasized that he's never had any intention of using Ultron, and wanted to go down the Iron Man route, where it's more about the technology, with the Nemesis being a result of that technology. There are a number of characters who have used Pym particles that could fit the bill, including that Eric O'Grady LMD I mentioned earlier, though seeing him would be very unlikely. I do, however, think there's a chance that Hank Pym could be the villain of sorts. His mental instability in the comics does sometimes lend him to villainous acts, other than the obvious, which I guess is similar to the whole Obadiah Stane double cross from Iron Man. Also, Wright was quoted as saying, "I think there's something in that it's a lesser known character, there's hopefully more license." For the 1% of people who are like, wait, Hank Pym will never do that, there's 99% going, who's Hank Pym? So to me, the source material is great, but it also frees you up to be like, I'm gonna make a movie. Sure, it's a bit of a stretch, but Hank Pym being a probably not entirely evil villain is more likely than, say, I don't know, Egghead or Egg Foo, especially because Egg Foo is a DC character. I've been trying to shoehorn this horrible racial stereotype into a video for a while now, and this seems as good a time as any, am I right? Fun fact, he fights with his moustache. The movie, though, will be a heist film, no doubt with the use of minor villains and probably a sinister organization along the way. It's been referred to by Wright as a kind of crime action genre piece that happens to have this amazing piece of tech. Also, I'd say we'll see the use of Pym particles in gas form, as he has referenced the use of gas in the past, and this test footage suit appears to be equipped with some kind of gas mask. So there you go. If you'd like to know more about Ant-Man, the good news is you're currently on a device that can literally look up anything. But if you'd prefer something in audio form, this week's episode of the Weekly Planet podcast goes through all these things talked about here in more detail, plus extra stuff like, some recommended Ant-Man story arcs. That's on iTunes and other online sources that I've linked below if you're interested. Ant-Man though, what are your thoughts? Is he a character that interests you? And are you looking forward to the movie despite him not being a super well-known property? You can leave your thoughts below or via my Twitter and Facebook pages, both ending in Mr. Sunday Movies, if you'd like to share anything at all about that. Thanks for watching, everyone. Take care.